guess we'll start then. Say good morning to a friend, but I guess it's time to go ahead and get started with this. Thank you for coming. I know it's a little bit early on the last day of Dreamforce. How are y'all doing? Woo! We were all just commenting on how hoarse our voices are after an entire week of talking and meeting people, so bear with us. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We'll do quick introductions and then launch right into it. My name is Angela Mahoney. I've been on the platform for, 10 or 11, 12 years, I don't recall exactly. And over the time, I've started from admin up through a little bit of development into project management primarily. I also co-founded the Portland Salesforce Developer Group, Portland Women in Tech, because this is a passion of mine, Forcelandia, which is a conference geared towards developers with my co-lead here, and Rad Women. I have another steering committee member here, which is an organization that we founded to help Salesforce admins cross over to the programmatic side and get a really good start. So talking about women in tech and what our scenario is like is really important to me. I'm also the mother of 2 daughters, so I hope that the work that we do today and what you learn in this room is something that you'll take home with you and start making strides in your workplaces.
Good morning. It doesn't work. Good morning. I'm Simon Goodyear. I've been a developer since I was about 8, which I know these days doesn't sound like that much, but when you're 39, that's quite a long time ago. Various jobs, bits and pieces, co-founded London's Calling, helped organise Forcelandia, and most importantly, and the thing that I'm most proud of, is being a Rad Woman coach. Yay. Which even when I start at midnight is probably one of the most rewarding hour and a halves I have of my life. So yeah, I'm really proud of that, and I want to stand up here and help. And Angela told me to.
Teamwork.
And my name's Stephen Herod. I've been on the platform since 2010. I suppose my claim to fame is a certified technical architect since 2012, but currently I'm a managing director with Accenture, where I run a team of about 150 people down in Australia. Accenture has a strong focus on gender balance with a promise to be 50-50 by 2025. And it's something I've been doing ever since throughout my whole technical career, is building gender balanced teams, although it was very unintentional at the beginning, and now it's becoming far more intentional. So.
Thank you. All right, can I get the clicker? Forward-looking statement.
We're going to talk about product a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen this before. We'll skip it. All right, so what we want to talk about, what is a male ally and how do you become one? The term gets thrown around a lot, but I think there's a lot of confusion on what exactly does that mean? What can I do? So we'll give you some takeaways. I want to point out that mistakes are okay. We'll probably make them on stage when we're sharing our stories. We've done dry runs, but this is a crazy crew. We have a lot of trust here, and I think that that's important to talk about, because this is not an easy topic to talk of, well, what can we do better? What have we done wrong? There's a lot of emotion involved. So we'll come up with a few things to go through. Thank you. If you've been reading the headlines or paying any sort of attention to what is going on with gender in tech, there are varying opinions. There's a lot out there. This was pulled, I don't know if I put the date, I think, 2017. Is it going too far? There's information about the pinkification of tech. We need more women. Let's slap a purple butterfly on it and call it, gender diverse. That's going to really attract women. That's not, though, it's not as easily solvable as that, but it's still a complex topic. So if we look at some of the statistics on where these are many of the Bay Area companies, how are we doing? The numbers come out. We know what the population is of women and men. We know what that ratio is. And we look at companies, and some companies will say, well, hey, we've got 30% women in our company. It's a great start, right? It beats those that have 10, 11, 20%. But when you start breaking these numbers down, the numbers are going to shift. And as you get more technical or into more leadership numbers, they drop, okay? This is not good. When Stephen talked about trying to hire and make gender diverse teams, if you've been in a hiring position, it's hard sometimes, because you look at the resumes that you get and you'll notice that I have 10 resumes and potentially 9 of them are men and 1 are women. So 1 is a woman. It's really hard to make a gender diverse team when you're not really getting a pipeline. So if you go back a little bit to where our recruits are coming from in the industry, over the last 30 years, what has been occurring is in STEM fields, those women that are leaving with computer science degrees has been dropping. Nobody knows exactly why, or at least any of the research I've done hasn't come across it. These numbers are pulled from the American Bar Association, National Science Foundation, American Medical Association, I think here in the States. But that sad red line going down is women who are graduating with degrees in computer science, while other STEM careers are going higher. So what happens is we are attracting fewer women into the pipeline at the very beginning, and I would argue back into middle school is where women start leaving. And then when we want to hire them, or hire us rather, we're not there. So let's say we get those elusive women into the roles that we want to have them in. We have a very high chance of leaving. In fact, women leave at about 2 times the rate of men by their mid-level career, which is pretty sad. Now, it's easy to say, for example, well, we're starting to have families, we've got kid duties, things to be aware of. But when you look at the information, and this is from a 2011 study from the University of Wisconsin, it's not just that. We're leaving for a variety of reasons. Work-life integration, obviously one of them. We don't like the work. Statistically, women are going to be given the jobs that just aren't as fun, more junior level roles, not as many opportunities for advancement, so we decide to leave. And in fact, I'll admit freely, I did that 5 years ago in a company that I did hit that ceiling. The job wasn't fun anymore. I loved it, I loved everything about it, but the atmosphere became one that I couldn't leave, so I did. And if your company is like the one that I was at, we documented everything, so it was totally fine. I'm kidding. We didn't write, documentation is a problem, so when women are leaving, we're taking all that knowledge with us, and that's really, really expensive, so it will hit your bottom line. Working conditions, the people that you're working with. So we're facing a really tough climate where fewer women are entering technology. We want to have those numbers better. We get into technology, and as we rise where we should be in leadership positions to mentor, we're leaving for other roles. Okay. So does this really matter? I would say, or actually, I hope you say, this is unrehearsed, this part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Good job. We're off to an excellent start. Yeah, it really matters. If you think of it, if you want to go above and beyond, we should have a workforce that looks like our population. You can take it to money, which is where a lot of the decisions are made. If you ignore everything else, half of your customer base typically is going to be female. So you want to have people that are helping create products for your audience that you're selling to, okay? So when the base that you have, actually you can read it yourself, what I want to illustrate is that it goes to the bottom line. If you want to maximize your growth, if you want to hit the bottom line, you need to be creating products and services that are geared towards half of your buying population, which means that you need to have a team that's made up to represent that. Anything you want to add?
Well, putting that aside, it's just the right thing to do.
And it is the right thing to do. But sometimes, as we've seen, I'll make a political comment, sometimes doing the right thing isn't what is going to actually happen. So if you bring it down to money, that's another way to bolster the argument. All right. So women are entering the workforce in computer science at a rate that's declining, not good. And then when we get into positions, we're leaving, also not good. So when you want to hire, you're in a really tough spot. And this is where the role of allies comes in. We women can get mad at what's going on, we can stomp feet, we can shout, we can go to rallies, but that's not actually going to make as much as an impact as we need to make happen. And this is where the role of male allies can come in and give all of us the push that we need, okay? So who can be an ally? If you read it, you'll see it's almost anybody, but those that are in a better position are cisgender, white, men, Western Hemisphere. We are on the wealthier side, even though we might think that our bills are a little bit higher than we'd like them to be. But I'm using the royal we, they're in a really good place to make an impact, which is why when I was talking about this panel, I approached Stephen and Simon to see what their take on it was and what thoughts they might have on this. So what we'll start doing now is going through some things that you can do to become an ally, because it is more than just saying, I'm an ally and putting on a button. There's a little bit of work involved. Okay? Mm-hmm. All right, so ways to be one. We'll go.
Okay. And I think just a prefix for me is there's a lot of stuff in this area that's like there's big ally, so sort of the social protesting in the street stuff, and then there's like the little things you do on a day-to-day basis. And most of my experiences are down towards the things on a daily basis. So for me, around listening to women's stories, and when we talk about, in my experience with my team and around women's stories, it's stories the first thing is to getting them to tell their story. And so I have a direct experience with an individual who was thinking of resigning, and the reason being is they had family commitments, and they felt that they couldn't support their family commitments of leaving at 5 for childcare and continue their job, but they never raised it. Right? And it wasn't until you got to that point that the conversation was actually had. And once the conversation was had, it took about a day and a half to organise with the client and with our team a working arrangement that worked for her. But she was very much of the opinion that, oh, I can't do that. And so getting the story told in the first place, and for me, that's proximity and comfort in telling the story. So we can do the posters and the walls, we can send out the emails, we can do the team meetings, but unless the person next to the person, they have a relationship and an ability to communicate, it doesn't really sink in, because otherwise it just comes across as, you know, propaganda, but they haven't seen the lived experience. So, and then after that, once they've told the story, you don't really get to debate. You know, with the circumstances, you take it at the face value.
Yeah. I have a colleague that I used to work with that he was completely convinced that if he could do anything, all the rest of us could. And he failed to understand that everybody comes at your scenario with a different background. Less education, more money, less money. Everybody's story is going to be different. So just because one person can do it doesn't mean everybody else can. And that's something that all of us face when we're telling our stories of, well, I did it, so can you. So being able to listen to the stories without saying anything is a really important thing to do. It's not always easy.
Oh, but I mean, I was going to ask you what you thought this one meant, to be honest.
So what this means is, we were actually talking about this. When we first started this, our dry runs, we had debate internally. We trust each other, but we still had debate. I think this was one of them. So I said, well, you know, when you heap-eat, it's kind of like mansplaining, and you're just repeating what the other person said, but taking it for yourself.
Which I clearly followed up with, you mean it's mansplaining, right?
Just kidding, right? Like, eye roll.
I'm trying to, sorry.
So from my experience with this one, I've usually seen this in, there's always that guy, maybe, in the room. So it's usually a meeting of 6 or 7 people, and it's maybe one specific individual. So it's that circumstances that you just have to gently do the gentle reinforcement, like, that's what Angela said, or, or I get what Angela's saying, and build on it from there. But that's my primary observation of that one.
I think we had a discussion as well when we were talking about this, about how do you get people to stop doing that as well? When's the right time to approach them? And not necessarily beat them up in the meeting at that point in time, but, you know, try and have a conversation to one side and explain why, and
yeah,
that reinforcement.
It's sometimes difficult. I mean, my experience is that individual is usually demonstrating other behaviours that is just one manifestation of their behaviours. Yeah. So it would be taken on more of a holistic point of view in terms of where they are in the power dynamic and so forth of the room and in the organisation, and structuring circumstances where they are not included in those meetings and so forth, and those kind of conversations, yeah.
And as a reminder, the goal here is build awareness. So once you start becoming aware of these, listen for them in your meetings at work or in conversations you have. I actually saw this happen in the True to the Core session with Parker. I don't know if any of you know Brett. I don't remember all the names of the people there, but the moderator was female, and she had said something, and a couple of minutes later, the person sitting to Parker's right said, and as you know, Anna was saying earlier, he did exactly that. And I was inside going, yes, I mean, that's exactly what we need to help build confidence, because what happens with a lot of women is we get mansplained, we get heap-eated, and we don't get credit, and we shut up. And you don't want to silence the people that are on your team. Okay. Ask what women need.
I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer that. I mean, this kind of goes back to the point you were making earlier about sometimes you have to ask what's needed. The example of your co-worker, she was leaving because nobody had asked her what she needed.
Yeah, but also sometimes, I mean, it's just a matter of building trust and relationships and getting to the point. And that's not necessarily from you personally, but making sure that the organisation is that the people have those connections to each other. And sometimes that's women having more connections to more senior women in circumstances and in projects. But yeah, asking is a genuine one. You have to provoke the conversation, because people don't necessarily, well, they definitely don't speak up for what they want. And you've got to provoke that conversation.
Yep.
And if you know, sometimes you need to speak up on behalf of a colleague as well.
Yeah, and I think the thing you've got to look at is there's lots of advice out there on how to get a conversation like, what do you want? What do you need? Straight off the cold bat is not the best way to do it, right? There's oblique things that you might ask, like, how are you finding the project? You know, is it fitting in with your circumstances? How are you finding the environment that you're working in? And you sort of sneak up on the question from different directions, particularly if you've been alerted to some indication that there might be a problem or an issue. So that's another thing, is to validate and check in on people. And sometimes, I mean, I'll speak to someone and I've got a feeling from their interview or from their first contact that they might be someone who might find it under stressful circumstances or situations difficult, and those are the people that I tend to ask more questions of the people around them to see how they're going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I chose this comic when I was putting the slide together to illustrate, for example, at the end, is Dilbert listening? Outwardly, yes. And I think you've all done it. If you're listening to somebody and you're getting like the the other person's thinking about, wow, kids have sports practice tonight. Ooh, I totally forgot to get the thing at the store that I needed, or my plans next Sunday, did I get those done? People can tell when you're just dialing it in. So this is really important. And to go to Stephen's point about the trust piece, that goes back to the beginning of actually really listening, not just outwardly, but inwardly, and then, keeping your mouth shut and not talking about, well, I had it harder. Mm-hmm. Because maybe you did, but in the grand scheme of things, that's your story, and that's not the other person's story. And I fully recognize this goes across any kind of diversity we have with Latinos, Latinas, African Americans. We all have our own stories to think about. And one final note on that piece is, we'll hear a lot about privilege, for example, when we're talking about, well, you've got a lot of privilege, so stop whining. Just because we have different privilege doesn't mean that we didn't work hard. And I'll admit, sometimes I have a visceral reaction to that as well. It's like, I came from the trailer park single mom scenario, and I did it. Why can't you? But the same time I had different benefits that others didn't, but I still worked hard. You still worked hard. All of us still worked hard to get where we were, but other people are working harder, and we just have to acknowledge that and become aware of that when we're asking what they need. Okay, recruitment. Mm-hmm. We touched on that a little bit. It's tough.
Yeah, and I know from I've got a couple of stories here that are kind of interesting. We actually had a recent experience where we went looking for junior developers. We actually said, we want junior developers in Salesforce. And my recruitment, Mel, my recruiter, said, we got like almost 100% female applications because of the word junior. And they were almost exclusively women who had some form of IT experience, often for a few years, but who'd had some kind of career break. And so we went on a recruiting spree where the entire days were female applicants and interviewing. I think we hired 11 in the end in one batch. But that was a little eye-opener for me, just to see the correlation in between. And it really brings back to that joke, well, it's not a joke, but women look at the job requirements and say, well, I've got 80% of them, I might have a go at it. And guys go, well, the ad got posted, I'll apply. Sort of two variations, and I think that was a very interesting thing.
That was are people aware of that study? That was with, I think it was Intel actually, that when they were trying to increase diversity, it was men will look at 6%, like I've got 6 of the 10 skills, it's in the bag, we women will look at and see that we're missing one of those and won't apply.
Yeah, and I see that, I mean, I definitely when I contact women who are asking for career advice, they're like, should I do this? And I'm like, duh. But that was a really interesting thing. The other one is really to keep an eye on the numbers. I mean, this is probably just a general statement. There's a lot of things that you can talk about in your gut. You're like, oh, yeah, we hire plenty of women. Of course we do. We had like so-and-so, Annika started last week. And then you look at the stats and you're like, maybe not as good as I thought I was doing. And I think, I don't know if it's just me, but I think I disproportionately weight the numbers in my head and don't quite think about it, and it's not until you actually get the numbers allocated. And they're not just raw numbers, they're numbers of applicants, they're numbers of people who hire, but then they're also the numbers at different levels. Mm-hmm. Because when we look at our pyramid in terms of seniority, we actually also demonstrate that drop-off in the senior ranks. And so you can have a feeling when you look around the room and think, oh, there's plenty of women in the room. But then when you look at the Excel spreadsheet, you're like, oh, right,
which room are they
some work
in?
to do.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the things I've done is I've actually just said that any woman who applies, we will do an interview and a screening interview for them, so there's no rejection at the resume stage, and do those kinds of things to just remove any immediate obstacles from the intake process. Obviously, everyone is still put through a process of multi-stage interviewing and skills assessment, but we're just trying to open the doors a lot more. And from my point of view, one of the things my company does is I'm KPI'd. Every month, HR is looking at the numbers, and it's part of our process.
Yeah. So advice if you're a hiring manager, you're in a really great spot because you can effect change much more easily, if you will, than those people that are not in a hiring position. I know that when I go out into my network does tend to look like me, and that's something that I'm also on this journey, so I'm growing an awareness of that, of my networks, right now it's pretty white. I live in Oregon. So when I think about that, I have to make an effort, and I should make an effort, and I want to make an effort, because I also want teams that I work on to represent what the population is. To Stephen's point earlier, years and years and years ago, I was the only woman in the software development team that we were on, and I told my boss, I'd like to see more women. I want more faces that are like mine. And he said, well, the vice president is a woman and the head of engineering is a woman. People I don't interact with at all, to be clear. So to him, he's like, well, the company's completely into gender diversity. So effectively what he did was said, no, we're fine. And even though you walk into your little cube farm with no other women, we're a completely gender diverse, aware company. And he was wrong, but he wasn't aware at that point. And this is way before we started putting a focus on this and opening up awareness. But statements like that of, I heard you, but here's how I'm going to discredit you, make us not say it again. So it's little things like that to become aware of think about your first reaction when you hear something, just give it a pause and then react. Microaggressions.
My story for this one is
actually
embarrassing.
May I interrupt you first?
No. Please.
We had quite a bit of this stopped our dry run the first time that we did it, because we actually have some disagreement on what a microaggression is, and I think that's normal. Just because the dictionary said it might be different in your environment, and that's okay as long as you're talking about it. So we may not all agree on all of this, but it's a really good start for a discussion.
Yeah, and my problem is I don't necessarily agree with what I did. So my first ever Rad Women session, an hour and a half, 10 women on Zoom. I got to the end of it. Shit. I said guys all the way through that, every time, because I personally use it as a completely gender neutral thing, but I know that's not always interpreted that way. And so then going forward, I made a really big effort to, change it, folks, that kind of stuff, people, fun people. I generally just sang and danced instead. But it was something that, only having lived through an hour and a half of that I kind of made me realize that I'd done something that didn't quite feel right. I mean, I didn't necessarily agree that it was wrong, but it didn't feel right, and I realized that I could have upset other people, so that's one thing. And I think the other one, which is a bit weird and incredibly British, is I used to work somewhere where we had a tea lady pushed around a trolley. Yeah, she went on holiday. Fair enough. She went on holiday, and that's not the problem. The problem came with what management did next to try and substitute her. They went around the office asking if anybody would be willing to help out, and they only asked the girls. And it was really noticeable and really horrible thing to do. So I stood up and I served the tea one day with a smile, which I know is unusual, but yeah. But it just felt, again, that's something that you see happening, and it doesn't seem like much, but it's just completely and utterly wrong, right? We're all people, we are all capable of doing these same things. So.
Yeah, I think my tale on that one is, I mean, I correct, it started with emails. You'd write guys and then backspace and go folks. And my preferred term is folks because I can't say y'all.
I can.
And no one in Australia would take you seriously if you did. It's like, what the hell are you doing? And generally, I'll use that term mainly. That said, I've never met anybody who's actually come to me and said they've been offended by it, but it's just something I pre-do. I think for me, one of the things, I don't know if this is in Microaggressions, but it was when we were thinking of, when you think of someone to go do something, and in our case it was organise a social event, and then the only candidates you can think of are female, yeah. Which was in my head, then you went, wait, hang on. Is that just because historically it's been really good, or am I making a mistake and are there other candidates there?
On a similar note, I was talking to our CEO yesterday, and she was saying that she was in an elevator with, she's the CIO, the CEO, the CFO, and a property consultant. They were looking for new offices. And the property consultant turned to her and said, oh, thank you for organising this meeting. Is your CIO not going to make it? And he genuinely thought she was the PA.
Oops. Yeah. And I'll say, like Stephen, I'm married a Texan, but I am not, so y'all doesn't come naturally to me. It might be inclusive. I use peeps, for example, which is not super professional, right? But it's kind of a minefield on how to address these people. I call my daughters ladies, because that's what my mother called us. Rightly or wrongly. And people will say, well, ladies is offensive too, you're not supposed to use that as well. So I think even within our gender, we're unclear on what words to use. Something might bother me that doesn't bother somebody else. And that's not a reason to say, go throw up my hands, we can't figure this out, it's not going to happen. You have to become aware and have those discussions and maybe agree on something that works in the environment that you're in, because it's not easy. All right, speak up.
Well, I mean, everything that we've just discussed, if you see it, say it, right? Don't hide away. We can make change, and we should help to make change, and the only way we're going to do that is if we speak up and we use our roles and our positions to kind of change that pendulum that we talked about during the dry run. It's swinging, and it's going to go one way and it's going to come back, but it's up to us to try and slow it down and get it to a central place. Yeah,
and I mean, it's very easy, I think, particularly in a social arrangement, to do that. I've been lucky in the sense that overt professional situations where there's been something that someone's need to be said hasn't come up very often. There's one probably terribly egregious example I've seen where I didn't speak up, and it's probably the worst example I've ever seen. But I'll give you an example. I talk this story.
Take names out of it.
I was in an elevator coming back from a client. I was with my client. I know this was before I worked for Accenture. I was with my client who was talking to their client. And their client made a comment when the guy said, are you going to arrange that meeting? And the guy said, I will get my B to do it, referring to his personal assistant. And I'm sitting in the back of the elevator and I'm like, what on earth? And I didn't say anything. And the reason it's like, I'm the supplier to this person who's talking this one, right? From a professional business context, like, I don't even know what would be the side effects of saying or doing something. I know personally I wouldn't lease a car from that company anymore. And I think that's the choice I would make. And, in private, I'll talk about the company that was doing it, but it was the worst one I've ever seen. And very much in an environment, and one where I felt that I still couldn't speak up about it directly. But indirectly, it would be something I would deal with around, I wouldn't hire that guy, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, another example, and I will take names out of this, real estate is also a field that can be, depending on which branch you're in, dominated by men. And there was a meeting of 2 men and a woman discussing their negotiation strategy. It was a pretty large portfolio. They wanted to go in and be on the ball and ready to compete on that offer. So one of the men said in the meeting, sometimes you just got to whip it out and show them how big it is. Nobody said anything. And that's like, just imagine how the woman felt. Awful. The guy had no idea, and then the other gentleman didn't know what to say, and sometimes it might not be appropriate to say like, whoa, that's inappropriate. If you don't feel comfortable saying that, you might consider saying something afterwards. Something has to be said. That behavior is literally not appropriate, but it can be tricky when you're managing complex meetings. Don't halt the meeting necessarily, but do speak up, say something later, or maybe say to the woman afterwards, I didn't know what to say, I'm here for you. Do something. Don't just register it and say like, hopefully it doesn't go that way next time. This is where we have an opportunity, even as women, to say that's not appropriate and show solidarity for that. Okay. All right, so I think, all right, so as we near the end, because we want to save some time for questions and answers, it's about awareness. You're not probably going to walk out of here and think, boom, I'm an ally. It's an action. You have to keep working at it and working at it. So that's what we'd like you to start doing. Okay? Look for it, see it. Some of these things you might think, wow, that's really obvious. Like, of course I'm going to listen. But make sure you're listening actively, not judgmentally. When you ask what women want, or any underrepresented group, really listen to it. Watch what words you use, okay? Day by day, little by little. In this particular one, don't be a man-interrupter. As you build awareness, you'll start seeing this happen in meetings. So that's the first step. Become aware. Hear what's going on. And then start speaking up, or speaking with the women that may have been slighted or spoken over. Yeah, Julie just said that. As Christy was just saying, things like that. Because this happens more often than you think. And I think you wanted to talk about the...
I was just thinking, a lot of it's like remembering to put your seatbelt on. There's just an element of just checking the course of action or checking it. So, review points for me would be, when we get to offer stage on salaries, verifying that we're in the right ballpark on that thing. Hiring numbers, promotion points and time, greetings and tones and emails, circumstances like that. And as somebody, it becomes a subconscious thing. And certainly in my head, there's a number of times when I do the thought backspace, move forward again. And it's not it's just a gentle thing you do. And after a while, it becomes second nature, like putting your seatbelt on. Mm-hmm. We're very big on seatbelts in Australia, just in case.
Safety first. So ideally, start their journey, start becoming aware, little by little, listen, do the roles that you can. But I think the most important thing is to start. And I want to give credit, these images I borrowed from How to Be Better Allies. It's a Twitter feed that I recommend, if you're on Twitter, to follow them, because they'll post examples of where companies are failing, where people are failing. If you think like we've solved it, we're there where we need to be, they have the examples of what is not happening, and it's really eye-opening, and they think it through well. The other site I have that I appreciate is also on Twitter, Man Who Has It All, and he also came out with a book. This person spoofs, will take basically a Cosmo cover that talks about, it's Friday night, the kids are asleep, me time, go do something. He'll change it and say the same thing, but put a male tone on it, or it's, time to spritz that beard, folks, and let's get the conditioner going. Because when you start hearing it with a gender switch, it's really, it crashes in your head of, we're so used to seeing that, and we're so used to being conditioned. This will kind of break your mental train of what's going on there. So I recommend at least taking a peek at both of these, and they do it with humor, which I appreciate, because this is a tough conversation. I don't like being yelled at or being told I'm doing things wrong any more than probably any of you do. So they just make it in a really readable format. Anything else, or we can go to questions and answers?
I'm good.
Okay, if people have questions, and if not, that's okay. Yes. There's a mic right there.
Hi. Sorry. voice is kind of hoarse after 4 days. I want to, it's more of a comment than a question. Sorry, I know those are terrible, but I'm in the position where I get to hire people, and it's really fantastic. And also get to manage people that are coming in from other parts of the business. And one of the things that has become really, really clear to me is that we all have an incredible, those of us who hire have an incredible responsibility to make sure that we're bringing people and women of colour, people of diverse and backgrounds in at a level that will set them up for success going forward. Because some of the people that I've managed in the past have come to me through reorgs or whatever, and I look at their levels and I think, WTF, like what the heck? You know, they're doing the same work, and you know, you can do your surveys and say, okay, within this level, women are paid the same as, you know, everybody else, all the men, and people of colour are paid the same as, you know, the white folks. But if they're not in the right level to begin with, that doesn't help. So I want to like put the call out to everybody here that if you're in that position, really, and you kind of said this as well.
Yeah, it's not it's really hard. I did an analysis, you know, a thing where I looked at average salaries by level in my area, and I would say that at every level, apart from one, women were slightly more paid, higher paid than men. But conversely, the number of women as you went up the levels, you know, dropped off, right? So that was one thing. And the leveling thing is really difficult because you've got to, there's a problem of people who are overskilled for an area not getting the recognition they need. But then conversely, there's some real harm you can do if you take someone who isn't at that level and you promote them beyond it, right? You can ruin their lives through stress or through them now becoming a failure at something they were exceptionally good at. We know they were at a lower level. So it is a vexing issue, and I think for me, it's dealt with at those promotion cycles. That's the point where you have to recognise, and maybe there's circumstances where you do a double promotion or those sorts of circumstances to correct it. But I think at every time you have to remove the bias, but still assess the individual in terms of their capabilities. Otherwise, you're doing them a disservice. You'll you know, particularly in the work that we do. Congratulations, you're now running a $5 million project. I'm not ready for it yet, kind of stuff.
Yeah, and along those lines, nobody wants to be hired because, I don't want to be hired because I can wear a dress. I want to be hired because I'm confident and I'm the right candidate. So this is about creating the environments to get those hiring roles. Go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to talk about a tip that I learned from a male ally that has helped me. So it's about amplifying other people's voices. So if maybe you have a smaller business or you're new to this or whatever, but I talk to this person and it's about really supporting other people in the Salesforce community. So I look at who I follow in the Trailblazer community, who I follow in the Power of Us Hub because I'm active with nonprofits, who I follow on Twitter, wherever I'm active. And then instead of necessarily saying like, oh, this is my own original thought or whatever, I will specifically seek those people out and amplify their stories because they may not have as many followers or, they may not be in a leadership role yet, but if they are more broadly seen and heard in the community, that may help their career. So if I don't have a large, diverse base of staff, that's one thing that I can do. I can, attend their sessions or tell them great job or, all those things, and it's really meaningful for people to be seen in that way. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I know today and the next several days for women in the US, like myself, who are survivors, are very difficult. And I've heard the same thing from, people of color and people who come from, violent backgrounds when there are police shootings and, all sorts of different things that happen in our world that are really difficult for people from many different backgrounds. And so when, Salesforce does something like they have different signs in their lobby or they have, meetings or, you know, special things you can attend, or a meditation room or whatever, something where people don't have to share their own survival stories, because that might be private or whatever, but just some way to acknowledge the difficulty that people might be having and giving some space for that. And I just wanted to see if any of you had comments on that as well.
I'm checking time.
Oh, yes.
I mean, because the acknowledgement piece is good, and that goes back to the listening with the non-judgmental piece. And as we wrap it up, and then we can sneak in one more, I want to thank you for coming. When I was telling people about this panel, I got a lot of sarcasm, which doesn't help. And that was based around, oh great, everybody that's already interested is going to go, the audience that you really need to speak to is not. And I think that's a really fair statement, but we can still all learn ways that we can, you know, find those people and model it, show women that you're listening and that you're allies. Okay.
Right. I was in a scenario with a previous company where I was in a room of male engineers and somebody made an off-color comment, and then somebody else said, oh, you can't say that because Adam's in the room. And so on the one hand, it was like, well, I guess it's good that they're thinking about it, but at the same time, as soon as I leave, they're going to go on talking about whatever. And like, I didn't know what to say in that situation. So what sort of things, beyond raising awareness, would you suggest to maybe reinforce the fact that things aren't okay regardless?
What?
That was such a sigh.
Well, it's interesting. I'm 100% certain that rooms full of women make off-color comments as well, but none of them will confess. I think it's you can't police, like that gets into the realms of thought police and all sorts of stuff, right? You can only do what you do, and particularly if there's someone in the room who's on the receiving end of that, that's the harm that's being done to them right now. And I think if you correct the harm and you deal with the harm that's being done to specific people, you'll work on the room when you're not there. It'll happen.
Yeah, that's more of an indicator of the environment.
I think otherwise it's getting into some very dangerous territory of you know, thought policing. So yeah.
Okay, and I think with that we need to wrap it up because they've opened the door. Thank you, seriously, thank you for coming, listening, listen and build awareness.